Hi, everyone, and good evening. My name is Jessica, and I work for Teen Services at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. I'm beyond excited this evening because one, you've all joined us, and two, because we're going to meet our community read authors, the very talented Kimberly Jones and Gilly Segal, authors of the New York Times bestseller, I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, the library's signature title for the Community Read program. Before we jump into this incredible program, I want to let you all know that we have teen programs happening almost every day online. So be sure to follow us at CM Libraries Teens on Instagram to make sure that you never miss out on anything, including programs like this. Now I'm going to hand it over to our very own Geneve Curtis, WCTV Channel 9 reporter here in Charlotte, who has a pulse on the city and understands how our signature title relates to our community. And thank you, Geneve, for hosting and leading this important conversation this afternoon.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. We had a great conversation this morning and looking forward to that continuing today. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This is going to be hopefully a really engaging conversation and really just a great part of what the library has to offer. Each year, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library hosts a big, exciting community-wide book club known as the Community Read. And in essence, it's designed to bring people together to talk about a single book and to really establish a community of readers and learners. The program also encourages participation in discussions of the ideas raised in those featured books and an examination of how these ideas connect with our lives and our local communities. And the library serves more than 1 million citizens in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. And as stewards of the community trust and resources, the library staff works hard every day to provide valuable experiences, and being part of an essential community institution is really ensuring that the public has access to information and spotlighting educational opportunities, as well as really having a pulse on what's going on in the community. And so with recent events in the community and in our nation, including the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others, a handful of signature titles were submitted to the library leadership to spark conversations around Black Lives Matter. Certainly here in Charlotte this summer, we experienced almost 2 weeks of protests, and there's a lot of work to be done in our community. And sometimes that starts with really difficult conversations. And so the Community Read really offers an opportunity for everybody to kind of be on the same page with a book that we have all read, but then be able to bring different perspectives to that conversation and really open up a dialogue from people from all walks of life in our community having that same experience, that shared experience with that same book. And so the library was excited to announce that I'm Not Dying With You Tonight by Kimberly Jones and Gilly Segal is the signature event and the signature title this year. The goal of the Community Read, of course, is to engage with residents in the community and elevate our community, having a place in the library to have meaningful conversations. The program feeds into the library's goal, which is that everybody in the community knows that the library is essential and delivers its mission to improve the lives and to build our stronger community. So with that, I will introduce our book. Hopefully everybody has read it, but it is an NAACP Image Award nominee. I'm Not Dying With You Tonight. It follows the story of two teen girls, one Black and one white, who have to confront their own assumptions about racial inequality and rely on each other to get through the violent race riot that has set their city on fire with civil unrest. Lena has her killer style, her awesome boyfriend, and a plan. She knows she's going to make it big. And then Campbell, on the other hand, she's just trying to keep her head down, get through the school year at her new school. They have different points of view. They hardly understand one another's points of view. But as we've read, they have to get through all of this chaos together. And along the way, they learn something about each other. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you the fantastic authors that we have with us today. Kimberly Jones is a former bookseller, and now she hosts the Atlanta chapter of the popular Well-Read Black Girl Book Club, as well as the infamous viral sensation, the YA Truth or Dare author panel at the Decatur Book Festival. She has worked in film and television with trailblazing figures such as Tyler Perry and Whitney Houston. She's the director of feature film and cutting-edge diverse web series. She also regularly lectures on working and succeeding in the Atlanta film market. And Gilly Segal grew up in Florida. She came of age in Israel, where she served in the IDF and graduated from Hebrew University, and finally decided to call Decatur, Georgia home. By day, she is an attorney for an advertising agency, but by night, we say she is a caped crusader. Right? But we know that her secret identity, not so secret anymore, of course, is as a very talented writer, something that she's been doing for a long time, writing her first book on an electronic typewriter that may or may not have copies in her mother's home, maybe in her childhood closet somewhere, but we won't give any secrets away today, but we're certainly happy to have both of them here. Kimberly and Gilly, I'll turn it over to you.
Wow, what an introduction.
Yes, I know.
I like, can we live up to that?
You can, you absolutely do. We had a really fantastic dialogue this morning, and I think really just to get the ball rolling on this conversation, I think you can just give us a little bit of background on how this book even came to be. I think finding your inspiration through the news story in Baltimore was really pivotal, and I think an interesting place to start.
Gilly Boo.
So Kim and I knew each other before we started writing this book. We were in a book club together, actually, of adults who like young adult novels, but we weren't such close friends that we had each other's phone numbers or anything like that. And in 2015, in the wake of the murder of Freddie Gray, there were protests and civil unrest around Baltimore of people calling from law enforcement for that death. And there was a news story that I saw on TV about a school bus that became trapped behind a police barricade. And the news kind of flew by really quickly. But Kim and I both have kids that are just a little bit younger than the kids on that bus. And we got really stuck on what happened to those kids and how did they get home? And here they are in the middle of this big situation, like life was happening to them. But the news didn't really focus on it. And so, like I said, at the time, Kim and I knew each other, but we weren't close friends. And I'm a lawyer by trade. And so Kim was managing the Little Shop of Stories, this bookstore. And I went to the Little Shop of Stories when I knew she was on shift. And I like lurked around the store waiting to get her attention, to the point where the staff was like, do we need to call someone? Is this a problem? Who is this lady who's trying to get Kim's attention? And Kim was like, no, I know her. She's okay. And she went on her break, and I was going to, lawyer her into writing this book with me. And I started rattling off the bullet points that I had come up with to convince her to write with me. And I got about 2 bullet points into this argument that I was making. And she said, stop right there. And I went, oh no, she hates this idea. She would never want to write with me. She's offended. And she actually said, you had me at Let's Write Together. So it was very Jerry Maguire, which if there are any children on this watching us, that is a very old movie that came out before you were born. But for the adults, it was our Jerry Maguire moment.
Yeah, she still lawyers me into doing stuff.
We're a really good partnership because we say we like lean into each other's strengths and lean out of each other's weaknesses. Like that's my role. I'm the back of the house and Kim is front of the house.
Listen, and I love it. Like I'm so grateful. Like I literally, when I have projects where I write alone, I say to people on the phone, you would have gotten a better version of me if you had also hired me. She's my person. She's my person. And so we've just learned how to like work with each other. And we did it from a very like ego-free zone, which is step one. We learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we learned to rely on that and lean on that, not just creatively, but also in terms of business. You know what I mean? Gilly's a grown-up business lady. You know what I mean? Well, she's not that grown-up. I'm giving her way too much grown-up credit. She does the best grown-up and she can do. But we have the things that we're both like really good at, and the things that we are, even down to when we were on the road and we were traveling, I was in charge of location. That was my thing, like knowing where we were supposed to be and what time we were supposed to be there and the address. Like, so every aspect of our life has like, okay, you're good at this, you're going to do that. You're great at that, you're going to do that. This is your weakness. I'm going to pick up the slack there. And I think that's why, we've been a partnership for 6 years. And I think that's why it's been successful, and why, unlike other partnerships, marriages and relationships, we are 6 years together and still happy with each other.
Yeah, it's really true. Yeah,
That's key.
Embarrassingly, the one time that we did not travel, that I had to travel by myself, I went to the whole wrong hotel.
Because I wasn't there to run the schedule of where we're supposed to be and the addresses. And whenever she's not around, I show up to places at the wrong time. And I'm like, oh, well, she keeps the time. I keep the address.
Yeah. We complete each other, if you will. To go back to Jared.
You complete each other. And really, the book switches off between Lena and Campbell. Their stories switch off in different ways. How does that writing process work for both of you? Where do you leave one chapter and the other pick up the next and switch off that narrative?
This is such a good question because we got it wrong in the first draft. We like to say this book is as much about perspective as it is about race, right? Each of these girls comes into this night with a perspective that's informed by her lived experience, and it makes it very difficult for her to understand where the other girl is coming from. And so when we first started writing this, we thought, it would be a great way to show perspective. We will tell every event from both girls' perspectives. So you would get like the football game from Lena's perspective, and then you would jump back in time and get the same event from Campbell's perspective. And we wrote probably a third of the book with what we thought was this really cool way of showing perspective. And we sent it out to some trusted early readers, author friends, and universally across the board, they all came out.
Ooh, this is terrible.
And they were not wrong, right? Like what they were saying was you're not actually advancing the plot, right? What happens is you build tension and you build plot and you build development, and then you're cutting us off at that moment when we want to go forward and you're asking us to jump back in time. And so we were like, well, okay, that's a fair point. And we sat down to do another draft, and we ended up leapfrogging the chapters as they are now. So now you see a portion of an event, Lena will tell it, and then Campbell will pick up the story. And because it takes place in about 4 hours, like the book is one night, 4 hours only, it really moves, they leapfrog in telling the story of what happens to them that night.
Yeah, and one thing that we learned, the first piece of advice we got from the first editor that we had was that when someone's telling you something is wrong, you don't have to change it the way that they are telling you to change it. But you do have to recognize that something is off there, that it's off-putting to people. And so it's really just a matter of like examining it and then figuring out, okay, how do I fix it? Like Gilly has this really amazing method that she teaches people so that anybody can be your editor. And it's the BCD method, which is like bored, confused, or don't care. So you just write in the margins off to the side, like if you're bored in this section, if you are confused in this section, if you like really just don't care. And so that's kind of like the theory that we use is like universally what we're getting is BCD back from people. Either they're bored, confused, or don't care, which means something needs to be patched there. And so when everyone was like, I don't want to read the same chapter twice, it was like, well, eight people came wrong.
And the leapfrogging, I think, really helps. That's what makes it a page turner, because you just, the momentum keeps going and you just want to keep up with them. Yeah. Makes it a very quick read for sure. Nelda Leone has a question. She said, how did you work together on working out the plot?
Oh, so we plot like fantasy writers. Like we overplot. Like a lot of times contemporary writers don't plot in grand. I mean, I can't say they don't plot. They have to plot because they have to write a plot. But what I'm saying is the intricacies of world building and character development and things like that doesn't usually go as deep as it does with fantasy writers and also with mystery writers, because you have a lot to keep track of. Kelly and I have notebooks all over the place full of like character development. And the original title for this book was The Neighborhood. And that's because we saw the neighborhood as its own character in the story. And so even with that, like we actually parked our car at the high school that we were going to use as our benchmark. And we got out and we walked the walk that the girls would walk down to a commercial district that would be ideal for this type of civil unrest. A lot of the view of like what things look like is because it looks like that part of East Atlanta that we walked and plotted, and it helped us to come up with a story like, oh, there's this gas station here. What if they encounter someone here? Who is it that they would encounter? What would they actually encounter? And so we kept extreme notes. Also, because we had to do a lot of research. We talked to riot survivors. We talked to SWAT team. We talked to Cedric Alexander, who was at the time chief of police for DeKalb County. We talked to all these different people to get information. And so we had to keep track of all of that. And so Gilly and I work best when we're sitting side by side. And I know a lot of times the questions that people are asking us, because they're saying, how do two people remotely come up with a cohesive story? Well, we learned very early on that other people do it all the time and are successful at it. We realized very early on we could not. We were not successful at it. We tried with like a Google Drive doc and all of that at first, and it just was not working for us. And we realized we work best when we're literally sitting with each other side by side and like going through the plot points and then just fixing stuff in each other's chapters. Like, you know, we have a code word that we use for difficult conversations and things like that. And I may say something like, code word, a Black granddaddy would not allow that. You know what I mean? And like that would get like changed. Or she would be like, code word, a 16-year-old white girl would have no lived experience in that and would have no idea what Lita was talking about. And so, you know, having those type of conversations, but I went around the bend and back again. I'm sorry. But to answer your question, it's because we worked side by side. Like we worked literally sitting side by side throughout, even now to this day. If we can't get a lot of days together, we can sit and write. We'll go on a retreat for 4 days because we have to be together.
Yep. The other thing about building the plot is the way that you use both plot and character to contribute to your story. So like Kim was saying, the neighborhood is an important character in the story itself, right? Campbell says something or describes it in there somewhere as like, this is a part of town that people tend to drive through going 50 in a 30 zone, right? And that's because Campbell is an outsider, right? She has recently moved to this neighborhood and she views it through very stereotypical eyes. And what she hopefully comes to see over the course of the night is how much love there is in this neighborhood, how much care. You know, they run into this cousin of Lena's, cousin Marcus, and you know, Campbell's first reaction is like, I'm intimidated, but there's no way that Marcus is letting those girls walk into danger by themselves. He's like, I'm going with you because it's love. They run into another woman in the neighborhood, Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson is the woman who's like, I know whose parents work late and who I have to make sure whose kid got dinner, and I'm looking out for everybody. And so like part of this was, and so why did we have Campbell as an outsider observing some of these things, right? Because she's the character that has the ability to make the stereotypical comment and then have her eyes opened, right? And see and experience Mrs. Johnson's nosy body love and Marcus's love for Lena and to feel that. So you take a character and you put the character in a place where she has something to reveal about the location or the story, and vice versa for Lena. She does it for different things too.
Mm-hmm.
You touched a little bit on the research that you did, which was pretty extensive, talking to the SWAT team. Can you give a little bit more background on just the extent of the research you did and why that was so critical to forming some of the plot? I know earlier when we talked, you said the SWAT team gave you some ideas of logistics, how they would respond to that type of riot and how that kind of shaped the narrative and the plot.
So I got to talk with SWAT. They were wonderfully generous with their time. We spent hours with them. We described the plot to them. They actually said, where's your map? You know, like a very tough SWAT guy kind of posed. And I was like, well, thank goodness we have a map. It was a janky little piece of legal paper where we had a sketch on, but we pulled it out and they, you know, said, look, here's where we would be staged. If you want the girls not to have an exit route here, you know, you need to create a funnel, right? Where lots of people are going to become trapped in a small area. They gave us a lot of terminology. The book is divided into 5 parts, and each of the titles of those parts actually comes from SWAT, right? So a mass disturbance is what SWAT calls a riot. They don't use that terminology. They say it's a mass disturbance.
Which was the second title of the book.
Right, the first neighborhood, mass disturbance. I'm not talking to you. Oh gosh, now it's a test of memory. The first brick is the next one.
I'm like, do I have the book nearby?
I do. Oh my gosh, so lucky. We're gonna cheat on our own book. Mass Disturbance. The first one is Mass Disturbance. The second one is All Call. All Call is what happens when there is a big enough event that all the officers in the area get called to one location. And they said, look, if you're going to have the level of chaos that you are telling us you want to describe, police have to be concentrated somewhere that makes it harder for them to respond elsewhere. So we had an officer-involved shooting, which would result in an all call. And then the first brick, which is pretty self-explanatory, the first brick gets thrown in the when the civil protest is becoming a riot. Fatal funnel, that's what we described, where they said, look, you're going to have to trap people in an area where it becomes very hard to escape. And then, of course, aftermath is the last section. So it's enormously helpful. They really gave us the nuts and bolts. They actually are responsible for the character of Marcus. So for those of you who Marcus stands, you can thank Officer Sanborn. Officer Sanborn, we originally had the girls meeting a reporter at that moment in time, a news reporter actually, who has gotten wind of this protest down on 7th Ave. And you could, Genevieve, you could attest to this, right? So what we originally had was the girls run into this reporter, and the reporter's like, hey, trouble on 7th Ave. But then he goes on to continue reporting, and he never stops to think about what's going to happen to the girls. And our SWAT officer was like, what adult lets two 16-year-old girls
wander into a riot and like doesn't try? He's like, no reporter that's an adult is going to be like, I've gotten my story, run into danger, young girls. Like, no reporter is doing that.
So you tell us, would a reporter ever, would you have been like, you need to call a grown-up?
But where you're
probably would tell them to call a grown-up, but it's sometimes, especially when there are protests and there are riots, it can just be chaotic.
Yeah. Well, and so they were going to meet him before the chaos. And so that was his point. If there was craziness going around, yes, they wouldn't have time. But him talking to them, knowing he's headed there to get a story, and they're saying they're headed that way, he would have been like, where are the adults?
Time to call somebody,
So we were like, that's a good point. And we replaced. That's a fair point. Or at least it would have stopped readers in their tracks and made them say, like, why wouldn't they say call a grown up there? So what we did was replace the reporter with a slightly older, slightly wiser cousin who has kind of the wherewithal to be like, danger, maybe you shouldn't be doing this, but not so much that he actually halts the book in its steps. And thus was born Marcus. And he is so much fun to write that he wrote himself into the rest of the book because we liked him.
And now people love him. He's like a fan favorite.
He's fantastic. Yeah. There's a lot of great characters. Were you each responsible for developing individual characters, or did you collaborate on the characters?
So in the original,
we definitely like collaborated on the characters. Originally, when we first started writing, I predominantly took responsibility for Lena, and Gilly predominantly took responsibility for Campbell. But they're so embedded in the other's chapters that we had to edit within each other's chapters just for like consistency of voice and experience.
Yeah.
Jessica has a question. She says, Lena's relationship with Black was so frustrating. What advice? We've all had a Black in our lives, right?
Yes.
So frustrating. But she says, what advice would you offer a teen in such a one-sided relationship?
Well, Gilly likes Black and I don't. So let's just start with saying that.
Well, okay, but to be clear, I don't want to date Black myself. I just liked writing him as an author. No, but Jessica, first of all, I love this question. Like, you're absolutely right. Part of the reason why that's there is because I think, strong women sometimes make bad relationship choices, right? And I think there's this perception of like strong woman means perfect or makes no mistakes. And so the first thing I would say is like, it's okay. Lots of us have made poor choices when it comes to romantic partnerships. I may or may not be in my 40s and still have made some poor romantic choices. So part of it is like, this is a teenage girl who's kind of stumbling and fumbling her way through a relationship and maybe not making the best choices. And we, with our adult perspective, you can say to a teenager like, hey, is this healthy? I guess maybe the one thing that I would say to a teenager who's going through this is like, there are a number of voices in Lena's life that she otherwise likes and respects who are telling her like, honey, we don't think this is all that healthy. And so you can't tell a teenager what to do, but I think maybe I would say to them, like, I think you should consider why you are discounting these voices who you love and trust in other situations in favor of this other voice. That's probably what I would do.
Yeah, I am the baby of 7 kids. I have 4 brothers. And so it's funny, just growing up in the house with so many stinky boys gave me a lot of perspective on how they view things, and like watching my brothers date growing up and seeing the girls that they liked and they really liked, and the girls that were just of convenience to them, and the girls that they thought were fun but they didn't take seriously versus the ones that they did take seriously. And the one thing that I always say was my takeaway from having 4 knucklehead brothers in my house was that I noticed that when they really liked a girl, like she knew it. Like she knew it. And he made sure that she knew that, you know, there was like there. And the girls that they didn't really like so much, that were like convenient, like, oh, I'm bored and it's Friday. Yeah, I'll go to the movies with, you know, Tamika or whatever. I recognized that the girls didn't recognize the distance in the time in which they got my brother's attention. And so I've always just used that as my own personal benchmark. And I tell my nieces who are teenage girls that, I tell them, if a boy likes you, he's a hunter. You will know it. And if he doesn't, you will also know it. But it's up to you to choose to see it like truthfully for yourself.
Yeah.
That's a good advice from both of you. On the conversation and the topic of Black, we do have a question from Barbara. She says, I wondered if the authors in their collaboration considered any other way to have Black and his friends make hard choices other than the looting of the hardware store. To me, this scenario continues to affirm the stereotype about young Black men.
Well, the first thing, let me just make it clear, Black had nothing to do with it. This is why he was like shocked and in awe that this had even transpired. Black, despite whatever people think about Black has great ambition for himself. And so this type of behavior is just not in line, with his ambition. And for me personally, I don't know if that person has seen my viral video, How Can We Win? One of the things that I choose to do in my storytelling and in my writing and everything is to be authentic to how situations happen so that people can have conversations about the why and not the what. The what is that they looted the hardware store. The thing that nobody ever asks is the why. And this is why we continue to have civil unrest. And this is why we continue to have these conversations and delve into these topics, because no one is saying, why do we live in one of the most wealthiest nations in the world, and people who are marginalized, who are bombarded with American wealth and the idolatry of things every day, all day, we are supposed to anticipate that with that consistent visual of, if you don't have these things, you are less than. And yet they don't have resource or opportunities in the community that they come from. And so an incident like this happens. And so they take this as an opportunity to shoot their shot. This is them shooting their shot at having some of the wealth items that we consistently, as part of the American Dream package, tell people, if you don't have, then you're less than. Then they're going to shoot their shot when an opportunity presents themselves. The why is because they have lack of hope, lack of resource, and lack of belief that one day on their own strength that they will be able to get these things. And so I'm saying this as a kid who grew up in a marginalized community on the south side of Chicago, and I did not receive a diagnosis with ADHD until I was an adult. So I went through my entire academic career just being told that I was bad, just being told that I was a bad kid, that I couldn't be controlled, that I wouldn't sit still. She doesn't pay attention. She doesn't focus. She doesn't finish her work. She's making origami in her desk. She's entertaining her classmates. She's being the class clown. All of it that I heard consistently, the label, all that I heard about myself was, she's bad. She's a bad kid. And it took resource and a very loving, praying mother who reached out and found as much resource, because she's like, my kid's at home, my kid's not bad. So I don't understand why the world keeps telling me that my kid is bad. She's a good kid. She's just, you know, kind of silly and energetic and all these things. And so the difference between me and Marcus's friends is simply resource. Therein lies the why. So it's important that I don't paint a false photograph of young Black men of like, oh no, none of them ever do anything. No, it's important that I paint the real picture of like, there are going to be a few in the crowd who are going to do this. Now let's delve into why. Now let's figure out what resources we can place in marginalized communities so we no longer get the what because we're conquering the why. And I don't think that I can do that if I write a fantasy world of all of these boys have perfect intentions. And because I want people to see young Black boys with bad intentions who turn out to be great. Because the thing is, if you write the narrative of a 17-year-old Jay-Z and he is killed by the police and you pull out his record and you show what he's done, then you stop the opportunity for the adult Jay-Z that we all love, know, and respect as a brilliant businessman. But in order for me to see the through line of you're stopping the life of a child whose potential has not yet been shown, when you're thinking about Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown, what I want you to see is that you have no idea what even this troubled child could be. But the only way for me to do that is to write them authentically. And to say that, guess what? You're gonna have a Jay-Z standing in the midst, and that's Black, who's saying, this is not me. This is not us. This is not what we do. This is not okay. We're gonna give this girl her stuff back. I have dreams. I understand what we do in the streets, but I have dreams, and this is not in line with my vision. You have to see Black in the midst of the rest of them in order for that story to be told properly.
Mm-hmm. Here's another thing too, though. I want to encourage us to avoid a privilege that's afforded to non-marginalized people is that they are judged on the basis of their actions as individuals, whereas marginalized communities are collectively judged based on the actions of individuals. What I would say is, why do we extrapolate from what 3 fictional characters did in a book to the entire Black community? No one is extrapolating from, I mean, there are enormous racism in this book from the white characters, from Campbell's father, from the store owners that they run into. Like there's another thief on the page, and it's a white boy who steals from Campbell's father's store first. And we're not extrapolating from his actions to the white community at large. And so what I would say is, let's please challenge ourselves to ask why he was accorded the privilege of individuality when Black's crew was not.
Right.
Beautifully said by both of you. And I think too, Kim, when you're talking about authenticity, being a journalist and a reporter, you know, we put stories out there, whatever people see on the news. Sometimes it's easy for people to disassociate, well, that's just, you know, somebody on the news and judge them. But when you wrap somebody in a character that is through a narrative and in this story that people can connect to, you get to explain the why. And this is where the conversation and the dialogue happens, because people make judgments what they see on the news clips. And they have the echo chambers of other people around them that have the same opinion, and they don't have that dialogue. But putting it in the authentic, you might have seen this on the news before. You may have seen this in the newspaper, but here's the background, here's the experience, here's the lived opportunity. And I think that really brings art to life.
That's what we try to do. We don't know if we're always successful, but we try.
Well, I feel like we are all more than the worst mistake we've ever made, right? There is inherent value in people. Black people have inherent value, whether or not they make mistakes, whether or not they engage in criminal activity. Like, they don't need to be the model minority to be worthy of consideration, to be worthy of respect and discussion. And that like, that's why when Kim talks about like focus on the why and not the what, like that's getting getting to they had inherent value, and let's ask what's going on in their lives before we judge their actions.
You have 2 questions related to the same topic. Patricia Kelly asked, are you hoping for a movie? 2 people have asked.
Well, yes. We actually have sold the rights to I'm Not Dying With You Tonight to 2 wonderful production companies, Prominent Productions and Radar Pictures, and they are hard at work trying to make that come to fruition. So put that out into the universe. You all put out into the universe that you want to see it on the big screen or the small screen, whatever happens.
There's so many.
Congratulations. That's fantastic. I feel like we just got a scoop.
Yes. So we are like, there's so much stuff happening with that movie deal right now that we are not allowed to say, that we're like,
can we talk about that? No. But anyway.
But the film rights have been sold. So, but I'm telling you, I work in Hollywood, I work at Warner Brothers. And so we still need your fingers crossed on it. And you guys need to like tag them and be like, we want to see the movie, because I just know from my own experience working in the office, I may pitch 12 projects at the top of the year and I may get 1 to pilot and none on the air. Or I may pitch 20 projects and get 2 to pilot and 1 on the air. So, the process is a very long process. And sometimes you make it all the way to the screen and sometimes you don't. But, we're fingers crossing that I'm Not Dying With You Tonight will swim through the murk and make it there.
We hope so. That'd be fantastic. It deserves to be on the big screen. The next question you have here, let me just... this was submitted to the library as well. It says, was Lena and or Campbell racist in this story? And if so, in what way?
Oh, I love this question.
Wait, say that for me one more time. I'm sorry.
Sure. It says, was Lena and or Campbell racist in this story? And if so, in what way?
Ooh, go ahead, Gilly.
Love this question. First of all, these are the moments when I'm so sad that Corona is keeping us apart from each other, because this is when I get real evil and I'm like, well, what do you think? I'm going to
answer that one.
I'm notorious for flipping the question. I'm going to answer for Campbell. Kim, I'll let you answer for Lena if you want to. So I challenge people to ask themselves about Campbell the really hard question, right? And at a minimum, my answer is Campbell is full of implicit bias. I think if you asked Campbell, she would not use the word racist to describe herself. And yet, she has not bothered to know this neighborhood that she has come to live in. She has extraordinary stereotypes about Lena, which are based on her race. There's like a moment, one of the moments when this is depicted is she's sort of ignorantly speaking about the neighborhood and why people would build big new homes in the neighborhood without sort of an understanding of why the Fair Housing Act was necessary and racial discrimination in housing. And Lena challenges her to think about whether or not she gets onto when a Black man gets on the elevator with her, does she sort of clutch her purse and cower in fear? And Campbell thinks to herself, well, yes, but not because he's Black. And then she stops and is uncertain about it, right? And so those are moments when Campbell is grappling with, at a minimum, the implicit bias that she has and the accuracy of it. So I think she certainly walks into this story carrying an extraordinary amount of it. I also would say, I'm not sure she doesn't come out the other side woke, right? Like that is, it's a journey of more than one night. She's got a lot of learning to do. As her author, I hope that she is firmly on that path at the end of the story, but I'm not sure I would swear to that.
Yeah. I think that Lena most certainly has some prejudice towards Campbell, like without question. And one of the things that we did intentionally is to have Lena being raised by her grandfather instead of a parent. So being raised by a Black grandparent is going to set that person's lived experience in a different time. And we're in the South. So now her grandfather's about 70. So you're talking about someone who lived through Jim Crow South, someone who recalls black and white water fountains, someone who went to a segregated school, someone who remembers the death of King. And so he is going to have a very different lived experience as a high-end baby boomer than probably her Gen X parents. You know what I mean? And so that influences who she is. She's been raised by someone whose experience is that white people are physically harmful to you. This is someone who would have been walking to school and may have walked by a lynched body in his lifetime. And so his experience is going to be that white people are a threat, that they are something to be, there's something to be fearful of, and they're a group of people to question their motives. And so he would have instilled some of that in Lena when she's sitting there. She talks about sitting and watching the news with Pops. When she's sitting there watching the news with Pops, like, what do you think his rhetoric would be? And so that's part of why we intentionally had her being raised by someone who would have had that lived experience, because he would have put all types of preconceived notions in her mind about white people. And one of the ways in which we utilize the tool to showcase that is when she begins to call Campbell soup. Because remember, for the first quarter of the book, she only refers to her as Becky. She wants to have no real interaction or connection with Campbell. There's no trust there. She's everything that Pops has taught her about white people. She is placing that on Campbell. And she's like, I need you for this phone. But what I don't need is to pretend as if though you're going to be my ally in this moment, because I don't believe that you are. And so that's part of what we see happening. And I know this is a community read, so I'm like spoilering all over the place. I'm so has read it. But part of what you see is that layer coming off and Campbell becoming human to her. Campbell is less than human to her in the beginning. She is a body attached to an electronic that she needs. And as she gets to know her, as they start to get closer, as she starts to recognize the humanity in Campbell, the first thing that Campbell gets is not a name, but something that's very significant to Black culture is a nickname. She gives her a nickname. She starts to call her Campbell Soup. And all the moments in which she wants to express tenderness towards Campbell, you hear her reference her as Campbell Soup.
You're talking a little bit too about implicit bias. I think there's also a moment where they've made assumptions about the way each other lives.
Yeah.
Campbell assumes that Lena knows somebody that lives in the bad part of town, in a dangerous neighborhood. She assumes she knows somebody there. And Lena assumes that Campbell is rich and has money to call an Uber.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have enough money to buy dinner at the concession stand. In what
you really read this book?
Yeah, I'm like,
I did. I read it. But it's interesting when you have these assumptions that are being made about each other, and how does that play then into some of the implicit bias that we have? And also, the two of you said that you have a code word when you have hard conversations. In what ways did you maybe, when you were writing, be like, okay, we're going to have a hard conversation about, this topic now?
I'll let Gilly address one of the hard conversations, but also I just want to address like one of the silly conversations that we had. It's like, Gilly didn't know what a Becky was.
This is so embarrassing. Yeah, like it appears like 40 times in my own book, and I had to be like, why does she keep calling her Becky?
So I had to explain to her what Becky means.
Right now, Becky, I had to say, why is she calling her Becky?
She's like, why does she keep calling her Becky? And I'm like, Becky is the Black version of There Goes the Neighborhood. Like when you're right before your neighborhood starts to get gentrified, the younger generation know it from a Beyonce song when she's like, Becky
from Beyonce, right. Becky with the good hair.
Yeah. They know it from that. But the OGs like me, the Gen Xers, what it meant to us and what it means to a lot of the younger people who live in marginalized communities is like, a code for There Goes the Neighborhood when your neighborhood looks like it's on the verge of gentrification is to say, oh yeah, this neighborhood's about to change. I saw Becky walking her dog. So this is like, again, this goes to the implicit bias that Lena has towards Campbell, is that even though Campbell lives in that neighborhood, she views her as an outsider who's infiltrating the neighborhood. And so this is why she gives her that nickname. Now Becky has many iterations of what it means. Like it's like a girl with a great head of hair because Beyonce said that. But it's like, to some people it's just like blanket white girl. It's like it's like the teenage version of Karen, if you will. And so, yeah, but what it is for Lena is that there goes the neighborhood. It's like, you're an outsider. You're not, you may live here, but you're not one of us. Mm-hmm. And so Gilly didn't know what that was. And she was like, code word? What, Becky? Where did she go? Becky?
That's accurate. Live reenactment of another one that we had to use the code word for, they're oftentimes like little things that lead to big revelations, right? One of the things that I've learned for Kim, which has been the most profoundly affecting to me, I have two examples actually. One of them are sort of the way that implicit bias plays out is often a death by 1,000 cuts. It is assumptions, and the example I'm going to use is the language, right? Lena speaks AAVE, African American Vernacular English. She never code switches, which is sort of changing from the language you speak at home around your dinner table to what Lena might speak with the white community, because she's in her own neighborhood. Why would she code switch in this area? This is home. Why would she speak a different way to please somebody else? She's not doing that here. And one of the things I learned from Kim is really the judgmental way that the world views African American Vernacular English, right? It's looked down upon, it's judged as a lesser version of English, when in fact it's a dialect with a cadence and rules and grammar all of its own. And the white community, sort of mainstream white community, will adopt elements of AAVE when it becomes cool. You know, we all say lit now, right? You see politicians tweeting, it's going to be a lit event. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Without ever being cognizant, right, that is Black slang. Everything dating back to put your hands together, which comes from jazz culture. And so we adopt and use these things. And when they become mainstream, now they're okay. You know, now we have whole classes that are like twerking and it's exercise. But when that is Black girls doing it, instead of applauding them for being the architects of cool in our society, we are looking down upon them. And that would be like a code word conversation that we would have, where Kim would be like, you are denigrating Lena's language, you are changing her cadence because it's acceptable to you as mainstream white culture, without recognizing that 5 minutes ago you texted me bling, and that you adopted a word without recognizing that you're now denigrating the same thing.
Yeah, because the way we speak is cultural, not remedial.
Another one that makes me want to go like that.
Another good code word conversation. Something else that you had talked about early, or in our conversation this morning, was about having these safe spaces, but Gilly, you call them brave spaces. You talk a little bit about, when our community needs to have some of these tough conversations, and where can you find brave spaces and be able to start moving forward and having those tough conversations sometimes.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. I think that I love that Gilly always calls it a brave space. I think that's one of the most brilliant things. I steal it all the time. I'm like, because Gilly says it's a brave space. Because what it does is it takes out this notion of unnecessary politeness in the conversation, because that's what a safe space is. You're like, oh, I want to ask about this thing. I want to say this thing. I'm curious about this, or I want to express this sentiment. But this is a place where everybody feels safe and comfy. So I'm not going to say anything. And it's like, no, we need brave spaces where people are like, all right, this conversation is about to be hard. Everybody, lace up your boots. Because we need to have these conversations, and so you can do that in a brave space. In a safe space, you're going to be skittish still about what comes out of your mouth. And to your question of where do we find these brave spaces? You find them originally in your own community and your own circle, and that's the best. I mean, just having a friend, like the friendship that we have, someone to have these conversations with, is important. And having different groups of people who you are having these conversations with and whose voices you are comfortable with amplifying is very, very good. After the very unfortunate and horrific mass shooting we just had here in Atlanta, I didn't feel it was my place. People were expecting me as an activist to write this long statement about how I felt about it, and I didn't feel like that was my place. So what I did was, I have a really good friend of mine who is part of the AAPI community, and I just reposted his post. because my only job in that moment was to amplify the voices of my fellow Asian citizens, not to implant my voice into it and say, as a Black frontliner, what I think. That's irrelevant in this moment. What I think in this moment is that I need to take a step back and look around me and see whose voice I can amplify and see how I can be a servant. Because really, at the end of the day, I tell people all the time that as an activist, as a writer for young people, as a mom, as all the things that Gilly and I are, at the end of the day, what we are is servants. And it's recognizing that fact that has allowed us to properly serve the people and thinking that we are the ruler who are going to drag the people to where they need to be. No, I am here to be in service of the people who need me to be in service of them for their own growth and development.
Oof, I love that. Here's what I would add to the conversation about brave space. A brave space does not mean license to come in to hurt somebody else, right? That is not license to burst through the door like the Kool-Aid man and say whatever the hell you want to say. You're not the Kool-Aid man in a brave space.
So visual.
That's how I think of it. Like, let me say this offensive thing because we're in a brave space. That is not what we're here for.
Oh my God.
Brave space is being willing to open yourself up to hearing painful things about yourself, right? It's not outwardly focused. It's inwardly focused. It's being willing to learn a painful truth. It's being willing to take a hit, right? It's being willing to hear this thought that you have is racist. None of us most of us don't want to be racist. And oftentimes we have this like knee jerk, no, I'm not. I can't be racist. That's the Kool-Aid man. And he will burst into the brave space saying, I could not possibly be racist. I am an ally. But it's like, ooh, let me actually step back.
You're so loud, ally.
You're so loud, ally. It's not that. It's like sitting and listening and going, ooh, let me open myself, because growth comes from discomfort. If you are uncomfortable enough to work with the stuff that you have to work through, change is a possibility. If your only reason for being there is to defend what you already think you know, you're not actually going to move. There's no movement in that.
There's no growth or trajectory there. What do you hope, this was a question submitted to the library, what do you hope readers will take away from reading this book? I hope it's a place for conversation. Like really, all of the things that we've asked. Like, is Black a good boyfriend? Are Lena and Campbell friends now? He is not. Even I admit that. Are Lena and Campbell friends after this night? What happens to the town? How do they recover? How does this school recover? I hope it's a place for because it's like a backward funnel, right? Like I can talk about Lena and Campbell and their prejudices and biases and racism. And then maybe I funnel backwards and I'm like, I hear that at my own dinner table. I hear Uncle Joe. I hear Pastor so-and-so in the community. I hear Rabbi so-and-so in the community talking about these things. Maybe I can join this conversation because I'm a little better equipped because I practiced on the book.
Yeah. I second that. I think that is it. And I think, for me, we talked about this earlier. I have this one piece of hair that's driving me nuts. Okay, there we go. We talked about this on the earlier call. For me, one of the things that we talk about when we do our school presentation is the books that influence us as young people. And first of all, there was not enough in the canon for young adults when we were all growing up. It just wasn't. You went from reading like middle grade books to like adult books. Like you got in high school and you started reading adult literature. There was not like this entire market like there is now and has been for like the last 15 years of books that are available, that are tackling conversations that are meaningful to young people. YA, if we toot our own horns, and YA has led the charge on expanding the canon and having a more diverse selection within the library space. And so because we didn't have that, and because the canon has really predominantly for, centuries been the voice of white men in particular, now that we are starting to expand these stories to have stories about the queer community and the Black community and Asian and Latinx and women and people with disabilities and all, and the canon is growing, but the canon still has to catch up for like hundreds of years of being like locked in. And then like, every other year we get a big female author, and every 10 years we get a big Black author. You know what I mean? And it's like, now that we're trying to play catch up, there are lots of conversations about what's in the canon, what should be in the canon, what shouldn't be in the canon, what voices we're trying to amplify. And I just found, as like a little hood girl from the South Side of Chicago, that like still the conversation was, I don't want to hear that voice though. Like, I need to only hear the story of the bootstraps Black girl, the successful Black girl, the Black girl who's able to code switch, the Black girl who comes from an upper middle class family, the Black girl who just wants to have a light and fun weekend. And we need all of that. But my question is, why is the canon, there's not like a ceiling for other people, but it was like, these are the proper Black voices. And anything outside of the proper Black voice is not accepted. And people are like, well, we've heard enough of that. Well, you actually haven't heard enough of that, because what you're doing is referencing movies and TV shows, which show a poor depiction of marginalized people, definitely not a three-dimensional version of marginalized people who live in projects, people who are economically disadvantaged. And so even in working with programs that I worked with teenagers who grew up in marginalized communities like mine, there wasn't much that I could put in their hand where they could identify themselves on the page. And so that's why it was one of the things that I want people to take away from this book, is that hood girls can be heroes too. Lena is the hero of this story. Everybody's making stupid decisions. She's having to think for everybody all night long. And so I wanted them to see that, like, I can show you a long-nailed, blue-haired, popping girl who speaks in AAVE and has the most brain power working out of everybody on the page in the book. Mm-hmm. They all survive because of Lena's wit. Because of the very thing that we're talking about is her marginalization, and growing up in the hood, if you will, is the very thing that makes her equipped to lead the charge that night, to know how to survive that night. And so it was very important to me to put that on the page, that this little hood girl is the hero, that she's not some caricature of herself. She's not someone for you to mock or make fun of or feel bad for. And then also the diversity of, I grew up in the hood, but I wasn't like broke. You know what I mean? And there's varied amounts of people. There's varied levels of living in the hood. I lived in the hood, but I grew up in a 2-parent home. My mother and father were there in the home raising me and my 6 siblings. But we walked outside of our door and we experienced a lot of tragic things that, I talked to Gilly about this. I witnessed my first murder when I was 15. And so I have this lived experience that's growing up in the hood, but it's not even the one you see on the page. It's not the one where they're like economically stable and they have 2 parents. They just live in this marginalized community. Like, so I wanted Lena to have that. Her granddad is stable. They ain't broke. They are far more stable than Campbell's family economically. Yep. Far more stable. Lena has Uber on her phone. Her phone's just dead.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Whereas, Campbell can't feed herself dinner that night.
Yeah.
Bringing this a little bit to conclusion here, can you tell us about the next book that you guys are working on? Why We Fly. It's coming out this fall, so not really working on it anymore. Pretty much done.
Close to done. We still have line edits, I think, left. Is that what we have left? Line edits?
We have a few things. Not just.
But it's done enough because they've put samples out in the world for us to get feedback on right now. Yeah. So, it's called Why We Fly. Gilly, tell them about Why We Fly.
Why We Fly is the story of, again, 2 girls told in alternating viewpoints. I'm going to get their names right. Eleanor and Chanel. Woo! I have to switch from Lena and Campbell to Eleanor and Chanel. And they are high school cheerleaders entering into their senior year. We like to say I'm Not Dying With You Tonight was a story that brought 2 friends together. And Why We Fly is a story that tears 2 girls apart. Their squad takes a knee, inspired by Colin Kaepernick protesting police brutality. And the fallout, as you can imagine, is controversy and trouble. That's Why We Fly.
Very exciting.
It's out there in the world. If you guys want to see the cover, you can go to either me and Gilly's page, or you can Google Kimberly Jones and Gilly Segal and Entertainment Weekly, because they did our cover reveal. And it is, Source Books always gives us the best covers.
Source Books is the best.
They are so good.
I wish I had a physical copy so I could be holding it up, but alas, but it's a beautiful cover.
It is a beautiful cover. Wait, I may be able to pull it up on my phone and show everybody. Let me see. We have it here. I don't know. I can't move fast enough. Never mind.
But it's out there on the internet.
It's out there on the internet.
Well, thank you both so much. I think that covers the questions. A lot of comments of people just thanking you for. Oh, there it is.
Yeah. Oh, they're so pretty. That's our cheerleaders.
Yes.
I love too just how poignant and on topic both of these books are in terms of current events. I mean, they just really resonate with what's happening and makes it very relatable for everyone. And so people are saying they're very thankful for this conversation, for your book, and for your honesty and your passion, and for broadening some of these conversations. So a lot of great discussions today, and thank you both so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica, I believe there she is. There we go.
Hi guys, this was such an exciting night. It was a very engaging and enlightening presentation and conversation. So I want to thank you guys. This is truly exemplified why I'm Not Dying With You Tonight was selected as our signature title for our Community Read 2021. And I want to thank the authors so much, Kimberly Jones and Gilly Segal, and our moderator, Geneve Curtis, and a big thank you to everyone who joined us tonight for asking questions and for participating in the library's Community Read program. And thank you all for joining us for our signature event, Meet the Community Read Authors, here at Charlotte Mecklenburg Library. Good night, guys.